and they've managed to join us. I know we've had a few technical issues, so apologies, we've got a little bit of a late start. So I just want to welcome everyone. I believe we've got a number of participants, police officers from different forces across the country, charities, academics, parliamentarians. So it's a really, really well attended event. Obviously such an important event, focusing on migrants reporting crime and trying to build that trust and confidence and improve police efficiency. We're going to be hearing from a number of panelists today. Just to say, for those that don't know, I'm Claire Waxman, I'm Victims Commissioner for London. This has been a particular area of interest since I've been Victims Commissioner, really looking at improving the justice and recovery outcomes for migrant victims and improving that access to safe and secure reporting. So this event is really aiming at building UK police officers' understanding of what secure and safe reporting looks like in practice. And today I'm really pleased that we're actually looking at other methods across the world, looking at different cities and countries that have yielded positive results from tried and tested methods. So our goal really for today is to demonstrate that secure and safe reporting is obviously achievable. It will lead to better justice and recovery outcomes, not just for migrant victims, but also for the police, because it will improve the relationship they have with communities they serve, that access to intelligence, and the ability to identify and pursue perpetrators of serious crime. I just want to introduce our co-organisers. Following research, LAWRS and FLEX, the research that they had showed that migrant victims of crime, such as domestic abuse and modern slavery, had a fear of coming forward to report to the police for fear that they'd be arrested, fear they'd be deported, destitute, and even in some terrible cases that they would lose their children as well. And this in turn was affecting the police ability to support them, collect valuable intelligence to identify and prosecute perpetrators. So in this 2-hour event, we're going to hear from a number of brilliant speakers where we'll explore practical steps where police can take to build that trust and confidence with migrant communities and to help access intelligence and increase efficiency. So the co-organisers today are LAWRS and FLEX, and our supporter PICUM as well. LAWRS is the Latin American Women's Rights Service. I've been working very closely with them the last few years. They're a feminist human rights organisation led by and for Latin American migrant women who are exposed to terrible violations of their human rights, facing gender-based violence, exploitation, trafficking, and they endure difficult living and working conditions in low-paid, insecure and exploitative jobs and face barriers to social protection. And then we have another brilliant organisation, FLEX, focused on labour exploitation. They're a research and policy organisation, and they're working towards an end to labour exploitation. And they work to challenge and transform the systems and structures that create those vulnerabilities to workers by undertaking research. They build knowledge and deliver evidence-based advocacy aimed at preventing labour abuses and protect the rights of those affected and promote best practices. And this event today was made possible by the generous support of the Platform for International Cooperation on Undocumented Migrants, PICUM, and they're a network of organisations working to ensure social justice and human rights for undocumented migrants. So just the format of today, we're going to hear from a number of panelists, and then that's going to follow with a Q&A discussion. So I'm encouraging all of you, please, to share questions either via the Q&A feature or in the chat, or at any point indicate whether the question is for the whole panel or if it's for a specific panelist. And can you indicate your name and the organisation with the question, or if you'd rather the question be anonymous. Just to let you know that today's session is being recorded and it will be made available online for those who aren't able to attend. So without further ado, I want to introduce our first speaker, Dame Sara Thornton. She is the UK Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner. And she's responsible for encouraging good practice in the prevention and detection of modern slavery and the identification of victims, but also looking at promoting improved criminal justice response to modern slavery across the UK. She worked in policing for over 30 years, and she was the first chair of the National Police Chiefs Council. So I'm going to hand over to Sara to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire, and good morning, Claire, and good morning to everybody. I thought I might talk about two things. The first specifically with regard to my responsibility as the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner in respect of modern slavery and human trafficking, but then make some comments more broadly on the issue of migrants reporting crime safely. As Claire has just said, my role is set out in law, and it's about the prevention and detection of modern slavery and human trafficking. And it's also worth saying that although it really is about the more serious, the more egregious offences, I absolutely am convinced that labour exploitation, the more serious offences, flourish when there is labour abuse. There is a relationship between the two. I think there's a reasonable body of evidence which suggests that that's the case. In terms of victims of modern slavery and human trafficking, I've just thought I'd do two slides just on the position because it is clear in terms of protection. This first slide is Article 3 of the European Convention Against Trafficking, and it says very clearly that it is not possible to enforce an expulsion order against him or her during that period of the national referral mechanism. So there's specific protection in that article. It's probably unfortunate that that's not in primary legislation, but we have got it very clearly in Article 13 that people who are identified as victims of modern slavery and human trafficking do have protection. And if we can just move to the second slide, that entitlement in the European Convention is reflected in the statutory guidance for England and Wales, which was eventually published earlier this year and talks about during the period of recovery, potential victims will not be removed from the UK. So I think it's worth being quite clear that when we're talking about modern slavery and human trafficking, there are protections. Now, there'll be some people who will argue they don't go far enough, but actually there are protections which don't exist for other crimes. So if we can get rid of those slides now, Sarah, thank you very much. And just to say, in terms of the point I was making about that link between labour abuse and modern slavery and human trafficking, you know, there's been concerns raised in the last few months, haven't there, about the textile industry, particularly in Leicester, and the sense in which people would be reluctant to report labour abuse because of concerns around immigration and their status. So I'm absolutely clear that this needs to be addressed. And one of the things I think is really good in building confidence is the work that FLEX have begun to do with the Gangmaster and Labour Abuse Authority to think about is it possible to increase the flows of information and intelligence by third-party reporting processes. So I commend that work, and I know it's in early days, but I think that will be very, very useful. But if I can raise the second point, which is this much broader issue of victims reporting serious crime. There's been particular concern about offences such as domestic abuse and sexual offences, victims with irregular status being really concerned about reporting and being subject to action. And we know that 2 or 3 years ago, there were a couple of cases that hit the media and people were quite appalled about what had happened. And I was looking at the London Assembly report that was written in 2018, which highlighted one of those cases where a victim who had gone to report rape in a police station in London ended up being arrested. So a real concern. And I know that the London Assembly asked the Mayor and indeed the Victims Commissioner for London to lobby and campaign for change in respect of this. So there is a serious issue, and I appreciate that. In my old job, when I was doing national policing, I was aware of the guidance that was published both in 2018 and further guidance in 2020. And I have been looking through that again in the last week. And of course, the guidance makes lots of good, reassuring comments about treating people first and foremost as a victim. It actually acknowledges the profound issues of insecure status. And it also says that the police national computer shouldn't be checked just to look at somebody's immigration status. So that all sounds good. But then it also says if in the course of an investigation it becomes apparent to the police officer that somebody is committing immigration offences, then the police will share that information. Now, what I haven't got to the bottom of is whether that's a duty. I found the law which says they can, but it's that use of the word will, and I can see why, despite the promises. And I know in London, the Commissioner wrote an open letter trying to provide reassurance to victims and saying, primarily, we will deal with people as victims. It's this sense of an absence of a firewall between people being victims and immigration action. I'm also conscious that it's a kind of an area where there's been a lot of activity. There is currently a super complaint being investigated by Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services. And there's also, well, there was legal action. I think the legal action might have been withdrawn last month, but I'm not absolutely clear. So there's clearly ongoing concern about that national policy. And of course, and into all of that, and interesting if there are politicians on the call, there was a few months ago, the attempt to amend the domestic abuse bill, which is going through Parliament, looking at clause 27, suggesting an end to data sharing with immigration enforcement purposes or for immigration enforcement purposes so that survivors can report safely. Now, those of you who follow these things will know the government didn't support that, and again referred to this national police guidance, which is, as I said, is subject to dispute. And I think what struck me looking at all of this and knowing a little bit about policing because of my background is that there is an argument to be had, a really important argument about people being victims and supported properly by the state as victims, but also issues about immigration. And my view probably in the UK is that we do need Parliament to be looking at legislation on this. And the reason, most of all, I was thinking, why do I think this? Well, partly because it's a big issue of which actually there's a kind of an important public debate. But also I was thinking, if the police acted alone and maybe we're in a situation where a victim came forward, they maybe were aware that there were irregularities but said nothing, and the case was going through the criminal justice system and maybe about to go to court. What happens then if the victim is subject to some sort of immigration action? You know, if we're going to do this, we need to think through those sorts of scenarios because I think it's quite complex. But with that in mind, really interested to hear how colleagues in New York and Amsterdam have dealt with this problem and come up with a solution at a very practical level. So really looking forward to hearing their input, and I will finish there. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Really grateful for you sort of explaining your role and obviously the issues that we're facing here in this country regarding the guidance and what's actually happening in practice and how that's impacting that confidence and trust really for migrant victims to feel confident in coming forward to reporting. So thank you for that. I'm going to introduce now Elizabeth Jiménez-Yáñez from LAWRS. She's the Policy and Communications Coordinator on VAWG, Violence Against Women and Girls, where she coordinates a fantastic campaign, the Step Up Migrant Women campaign, which I've been a huge supporter of from the start, a campaign by and for migrant, Black and minority ethnic women who advocate for access to protection from abuse, irrespective of their immigration status. So Elizabeth, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Thank you, Claire. And thank you to everyone for attending and contributing to this critical discussion. Today, I will give you a very short overview of the impacts of data sharing on migrant survivors of violence against women and girls, and the campaigning work on safe reporting that we do at LAWRS. As Claire mentioned before, LAWRS is a feminist and human rights organization that has worked over 37 years supporting and advocating for the rights of Latin American women in the UK. Every day, we provide services to over 5,000 women whose lives are directly impacted by the damaging effects of the hostile immigration environment. Evidence shows that migrant women are vulnerable to various and overlapping forms of violence. They are more likely to experience VAWG from multiple perpetrators, and as part of the abuse, they are continuously misinformed about their rights. Amongst these vulnerabilities, migrant victims experience a distinctive form of abuse, the use of their insecure immigration status to coerce and control them. According to IMCAN, in the UK, more than 90% of migrant women with insecure immigration status have been threatened with deportation by their perpetrators if they report the abuse. For that reason, migrant women are more reluctant to report the abuse to the police, and as a result, they endure domestic violence for longer periods in comparison with other victims. In the last few years, this fear has been exacerbated by the implementation of hostile policies, which have prioritized immigration control over their safety. To illustrate this trend, in 2018, Freedom of Information requests showed that 60% of police forces in the UK were reporting victims and witnesses of crime with insecure immigration status to the Home Office. As it is clear that reporting abuse might bring negative consequences to the victims instead of their perpetrators, women are left with the stark choice of staying in violent relationships or facing real risk of detention or deportation. Last year at LAWRS, we published The Right to be Believed, a report based on the experiences of VAWG of more than 50 women with insecure immigration status. We found out that more than 50% of migrant women feared that the police would not believe them because of their immigration status. Disturbingly, we showed that almost a fifth of these women never formally reported the abuse, and that the most cited factor preventing women from doing so was the fear of deportation. We also documented the cases of 4 women who ended up detained when reporting the abuse to the police. From our frontline experience supporting victims of gender-based violence, we understand well the negative impacts of these data sharing schemes and how they prevent victims from coming forward while undermining their trust in the police. We also see how this practice enables perpetrators to exert abuse with impunity. In fact, information sharing has created cultures of impunity for perpetrators, while there's a whole group of victims who are prevented from accessing safety, support, and justice, migrant women. Amongst the women's sector, the VAWG sector, and key decisions makers, as it was already mentioned, there has been a broad consensus about the harmful effects of these arguments. Currently, there's an ongoing, as Sara mentioned, there's an ongoing super complaint made by 2 members of the Step Up Migrant Women campaign, Southall Black Sisters and Liberty, about the police sharing data of victims and witnesses for immigration purposes. At LAWRS, we have been campaigning on this issue since 2017, when we launched the Step Up Migrant Women campaign, which is supported by more than 50 organizations. We believe that the establishment of safe reporting mechanisms is an essential step forward to improve crime reporting, both in the interest of public and community safety, as well to guarantee access to justice. We maintain that the focus of the police when encountering migrant victims must be on their safety and not on their immigration status. And as Sara mentioned as well, since last year, we have been actively working with policymakers following the process of the Domestic Abuse Bill. We presented an amendment that seeks for the establishment of safe reporting mechanisms and then to data sharing between vital public services, particularly the police and the Home Office. What we included in this amendment was also protection for witnesses, as we know that due to the real risk of detention or deportation, they usually are afraid to cooperate in any police investigation. And just to finish, as Sara mentioned, sadly, our amendment was withdrawn, and the argument used by the government is that that data sharing is needed to safeguard victims. However, they haven't been able to provide a single example of a woman who have been protected by these data sharing schemes. Currently, we continue working on the bill as it has moved to the House of Lords, and we are working with peers aiming for a legislative change that ensures all women can report abuse safely, regardless of their immigration status. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Sorry to have to rush you. I know it's so important to talk about the campaign and the work and what you've achieved so far. I know we still have a long way to go, but the Step Up Migrant Women campaign has really progressed things. And I know we weren't successful in the domestic abuse bill yet, but obviously we still have the LAWRS, and it's something that we're all strongly pushing still. So thank you. I'm going to introduce Dolores Modern. She's also from LAWRS. She's the Policy and Communications Coordinator on Employment Rights at LAWRS. She leads on the advocacy for better avenues to support and justice for Latin American women who are experiencing labour abuse and exploitation in the UK. So I'm just going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Claire, and thanks everyone who has joined us today. As Elizabeth has explained, LAWRS supports Latin American women living in the UK, most of whom are facing different kinds of abuse, exploitation and trafficking, working in low-paid sectors or enduring severe poverty and precarious living conditions. Last year, we published the report, The Unheard Workforce, which gathers evidence from 326 cases from our Employment Rights Advice Service between 2016 and 2018 of women working mainly in cleaning, hospitality and domestic work. We found that they experienced a total of 894 employment rights breaches, some of the main ones being unlawful deduction of wages and underpayment of national minimum wage, lack of contracts and pay slips, denial of annual leave and sick leave, verbal and physical abuse, among others. Working in these conditions can increase vulnerability and pave the way for severe exploitation. And in fact, 11 cases of potential trafficking for labor exploitation were identified in this study. Next one, please, Sara. So what do you do if you are a victim of exploitation or trafficking or modern slavery? That may depend on many things, but immigration status is certainly one of the defining factors that will influence your decision. As of 2016, because of the illegal working offence, it is a crime to work in the UK without a regular immigration status. So if you're undocumented in this country, you are committing a crime just by working. Employers, of course, know this, and many use it as a weapon. And just like domestic abuse perpetrators threaten their victims with reporting them, so do unethical employers who exploit undocumented workers. This guarantees them a flexible and compliant workforce that can be paid less than the minimum wage, denied basic employment rights, and even work without receiving any pay in return. Migrants who are not undocumented are also directly affected by all this. So lack of knowledge of the system and language barriers compound the risk by making it more difficult for migrants to understand their rights and access support and justice. Brexit has added another layer of vulnerability because changes to policy and legislation are making it more difficult for workers and sometimes even for employers to understand the situation of EU citizens. We've heard, for instance, from many service users on EU passports who have been misinformed by their employers or by other people. And they're told, for example, that since Brexit, they don't have the same rights as British citizens, or that they could get in trouble with their Home Office. And regardless of threats or fears, we know that immigration is in fact shared, immigration information is in fact shared, and that undocumented migrants who report a crime can end up being detained and deported. As migrant organizations, LAWRS and many others cannot currently encourage our service users to go to the police or other law enforcement agencies without warning them of the risks. And unfortunately, for many migrants, the consequences of detention, deportation, and loss of earnings might be much worse than the benefit of reporting a crime. Next, please, Sara. I'd like to share a quote with you all from a woman we supported at LAWRS. She said, "When you are undocumented, you are forced to choose between many impossible choices. You have to choose between letting your employer steal away half your wages or keeping your children fed. You have to choose to either stay with a violent man or choose to sleep on the street. You have to choose between being robbed because they know you're undocumented or being raided by the immigration officers. Your life becomes a series of impossible choices. You just have to choose the one that makes you sleep a little bit better at night." So these are the kind of vulnerabilities that migrants are exposed to because of their fear of reporting abuse and exploitation. They're the choices that they're cornered into making. If we want to end exploitation and abuse, it's not just a matter of addressing the vulnerabilities that increase the likelihood of becoming a victim in the first place, but also ensuring that perpetrators don't have the chance to act with impunity. And secure reporting mechanisms are at the heart of eradicating crimes against migrants and holding perpetrators to account. We recently had a case of a woman who was a victim of exploitation by someone who owns several sweatshops. She came to LAWRS for support, and we explained that she was a victim of trafficking and exploitation. And we were able to help her access a refuge, where they in turn helped her contacting the police. And she was able to report her employer and give very valuable information. She's an EU citizen, and it still took the intervention of 2 organizations for her to understand the situation and gather the courage to report the crime, as she was very fearful. In contrast, around the same time, we also supported a woman victim of domestic servitude working in terrible conditions. She's undocumented, and she chose not to report her employer and continue working for her because the fear of being deported was too great. Next, please, Sara. Migrant workers who are victims of exploitation are in a key position to bring vital information to the police. So building trust with these communities is key for the police to be able to tackle and prevent crime. However, when the police prioritize immigration status and share information of victims and witnesses with immigration enforcement, this trust is automatically undermined. And there is abundant evidence of this, as organizations like LAWRS support countless migrants who are scared to go to the police, choosing instead to stay in exploitative conditions because reporting their employer might lead to their detention, deportation, or prosecution. We also hear about victims who do decide to go to the police, but who are not identified as victims because their immigration status takes priority. Protecting migrants and building that trust, particularly in this context, requires a much broader change in policy and legislation, which is beyond today's conversation, such as repealing the illegal working offense, but guaranteeing secure reporting mechanisms to report exploitation, trafficking, and modern slavery without the threat of detention and deportation is an important first step. And we're really excited to hear from police forces in other countries on how they did this and why it has worked. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. And again, just for explaining in more detail just the terrible situation that migrant victims are being placed in, having to make that awful choice about whether they stay in very violent and abusive relationships or working conditions, as opposed to getting the help and support they deserve and need. Otherwise they face deportation or being detained, etc. So it's an awful situation that they're being placed in. So thank you for highlighting that. We're going to come to Letícia Ishibashi, who's from FLEX. She's a network and league officer at FLEX. She coordinates the Labour Exploitation Advisory Group. It's a coalition of 10 organisations that are working to ensure responses to labour exploitation are informed and guided by the interests, needs and experiences of those affected by it. So Letícia, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks everyone for joining the discussion today. So as Dolores and Elizabeth have mentioned, this fear is widespread among migrants who have experienced abuse of exploitation, this fear of reporting. You just need to ask those who directly work with survivors, and they'll tell you a number of cases where this was a major deterrent to reporting a crime. As we've seen, this also affects migrants with regular status, either because they're unsure about what their rights are, or because they're afraid that reporting will put their undocumented friends and colleagues at risk. This is why it's so important for migrant communities to trust the police. Without this trust, crime goes unreported and victims can feel trapped in exploitative situations. Then, what does it mean to have a secure reporting system? And what can the police do to build trust so that migrants feel confident about reporting crime? My goal is to explore the practical steps the police can take to introduce and strengthen secure reporting mechanisms. Can we go to the next slide, please, Sara? Thank you. So to understand what it means to have a secure reporting system, it's important to understand what makes a system insecure from a migrant's perspective. An insecure system is one that creates risk of further harm for a victim of crime, or that results in victims being penalized for reporting crimes that are committed against them. In the case of migrant victims, this further harm can be an increased vulnerability to detention or to removal following interaction with law enforcement. This means that to understand what secure reporting could look like here in the UK, we need to understand how the police's day-to-day operations actively or unintentionally put migrant victims at risk of further harm. Next slide, please. So about 18 months ago, the Labour Exploitation Advisory Group, which is coordinated by us here at FLEX, and of which LAWRS and many other organizations working with people who have experienced exploitation are part of, we set out to understand exactly that. So we wanted to figure out how information about someone's immigration status became available to the Home Office after that person had encountered the police. We've identified 4 main ways this happens. The first one is quite straightforward. So it's when a police officer suspects someone is undocumented. And I say suspects because the immigration system in the UK is extremely complex. So it's often complicated to figure out what someone's status is on the spot, as we've seen, for example, with the Windrush scandal. It's not always a clear line. So yeah, the first one is when the police suspect that someone is undocumented, and then they actively report that person to immigration enforcement. The issue with that is that, as you know, identifying cases of exploitation is quite complex, and people often need time to reflect and to open up about the experiences they've had. In fact, the national referral mechanism itself recognizes that victims often don't perceive themselves as such, and that they need time to reflect on what they have experienced before they're ready to disclose them. So when police officers actively report an undocumented person to immigration, what can happen, and what has happened, is that a victim of exploitation is then arrested, detained, and removed from the UK as a direct result from that report. And when this happens, the message that is being sent to other migrants is that they may as well face the same consequences if they report. And therefore, as we've seen today, they often choose not to report. This alone is really concerning, but there are other layers to this issue. So while many police officers rightly treat victims of crime as victims first, they may not realize that in a number of cases, they may end up unintentionally making migrant victims vulnerable to further harm. In our research, we've identified 3 ways the police passively or unintentionally reports migrants to immigration enforcement. The first one is when a police officer conducts an operation into an environment where they suspect exploitation is taking place. But then instead of carrying out the operation by themselves, they invite the Home Office, who then carry out immigration checks simultaneously. The issue with these operations are problematic because they create a situation in which victims are unable to differentiate between immigration enforcement and the police because they're regularly showing up together to these operations. So even though the police themselves are not conducting immigration checks, the victims are never sure whether this is the case and whether they can trust that they won't be penalized for reporting to the police then or at a later stage when they're ready to disclose. Another passive channel is what we call a chain referral. And this happens when the police signpost a migrant to another government service that in turn reports that victim to the immigration authorities, essentially resulting in further harm. And I realize this is not necessarily on the police's control. However, I think it's important to understand how complex and pervasive immigration enforcement can be within some government services. And therefore, it's useful to know how that can impact the police's own work. Finally, the last passive channel we've identified was through the use of the Immigration Enforcement's National Command and Control Unit. For those of you who don't know, this is a service the Home Office provides so that police officers can inquire about an individual's immigration status. This can be helpful, for example, if the police wants to check if a migrant victim has any live immigration applications, or if they want to access more information about who that person is and so on. However, the Home Office has confirmed that information gathering during these calls can be used for immigration enforcement action. So this means that even though the police don't intend to create further harm, that can happen as a result of this interaction. We've also identified other ways that information can travel from the police to immigration enforcement. And this is through systems like joint databases, bulk data sharing, or embedded and seconded immigration officers in police stations. But thankfully, we didn't find evidence of these practices. It may be, however, that other police forces throughout the UK do use some of these systems, and that would then add to the ways migrant victims can be subjected to further harm. Next slide, please. So before I jump into how we can address these gaps, it's important to note that the police are not required by law to report people with insecure immigration status to the Home Office. And it was interesting that Dame Sara mentioned this earlier, and actually the 2018 NPCC guidance left it open to the discretion. And this year they added this will, which makes it a bit uncertain. But I think what can really confirm that is discretionary is the fact that a handful of police forces do not report migrants to immigration enforcement, showing a good practice in this area. And the law does not require that. Even though the law doesn't require it, we have found evidence of police officers who believe they have a duty to do so, and therefore they have reported migrant victims. And I think this is quite telling, because if there is no legal duty, police forces in the UK could be actively seeking to prioritize the safeguarding of migrant victims by introducing safe reporting systems, instead of spending time pursuing administrative immigration offenses. And even if we were considering immigration offenses that have been criminalized, like Dolores mentioned, so the illegal working offense, we would need to take time to think about whether those cases are potential cases of forced labor, servitude, or other forms of exploitation, because we and others working with survivors had come across a number of cases in which migrant victims were first flagged by the police as immigration offenders, when in reality, they were later identified as victims of exploitation. That's why it's so important for the police to put migrant victim safeguarding ahead of any immigration matter. Last slide, please. Yeah, so what can be done? So, as you know, not all police forces across the UK work the same way. So the first thing to do is to identify your own practices. And to do that, you should be asking yourself and your colleagues questions like, do you ask people about their immigration status or seek to find out about it? And if you do, why is it that you do that? Have any of your officers reported migrants with insecure status to the Home Office in the last 12 or 24 months? Do you conduct simultaneous inspections with immigration enforcement? And if you do, how often does that happen? And why do you do that? Do you know the ethnic and migrant composition of the communities that you serve? And have you built strong relationships with organizations supporting those groups? Have you established dialogues with migrant victims and their communities about their perception of the police and the reasons why they do trust or do not trust law enforcement? Once you know where you're at, you can then develop clear rules on engaging with migrants and ensuring all officers are aware and abide by these rules. I won't go into too much detail on this for the sake of time, but I'll share a link to this report in the chat. And the report contains practical recommendations on what those rules should cover and what they should look like. We're also happy to have one-to-one conversations about this and support you to introduce and strengthen secure reporting mechanisms within your police force. But I'd say at a minimum, the policy should ensure that police officers will prioritize migrant victim safeguarding and will not pursue immigration matters, as we've seen this is counterproductive to the police's aim to support the communities it serves. And finally, police officers should work more closely with migrant organizations to build trust and ensure migrants are aware that they can securely report to the police. Fortunately, today, we're joined by experts from Nypd and the Amsterdam police who share how they've made this a reality in their cities. And hopefully we can build on those lessons to start developing secure reporting systems here in the UK. Thank you both so much for sharing your experience with us today. And thank you everyone for joining the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Letícia. Yeah, that was brilliant. That was obviously the research that you've done is so important, and thank you for explaining in detail the police practices that are really reinforcing the migrant victims' fear of coming forward and reporting, and how safeguarding has to be prioritised. So there is a lot of police officers to. So now we're going to look at, obviously we've set the scene of what happens here in this country, but I'm really pleased to introduce Michael Schwartz from the Dutch National Police, the Amsterdam unit. He's a project leader and advisor at the Amsterdam Police, where he's worked for over 25 years. And he's pioneered a successful approach that has strengthened that trust between migrant communities and police officers and increased the police access to valuable intelligence, which I'm really looking forward to him speaking to us about today. So Michael, over to you, please.
Thank you, everyone. I hope that everyone is able to hear me and see my presentation. My name is Michael Zwart, as I was introduced already. I'm I work for the Amsterdam Police Department, and I'm also the national advisor on undocumented victims. Equal rights without discrimination, and this is where it's all about. How did we start? Then I have to go to the next slide, please. It started as a pilot in Amsterdam in 2000, well, about 2013, a little bit earlier than that actually, and we thought we have a problem because we didn't see everyone in the society, particularly the illegal aliens or undocumented citizens. So we want to have a pilot, and we need approval by the government, because it was important that it was not only for the police but also for the Justice Department, that they also participate in the pilot. So say Mr. Teffen, if he was wanted to cooperate. In the first place, he did not agree with it, but when we talk about victims, then he was able to participate, and he makes it possible the pilot. The legal base, and that's the next base, the legal base for a pilot. Can I go to the next slide, please? Yeah, it's actually, it's possible to see the
Michael, sorry, we're having some sound difficulty.
Yeah, the legal base of this pilot is the European Convention of Human Rights. So we had a number of bases that we thought. Yes. Can you all hear me?
Michael, I think we're having a little bit of difficulty with your sound. You keep cutting in and out. Apologies to interrupt you talking, but we so want to hear you speak. I don't know if you're able to work on that a little bit.
Yes.
We keep losing you a little bit. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, that's unfortunately nice to.
Okay.
Do you think it's okay now, or it's still?
Yeah, do we think it's a little bit better? Yeah, you might just have to repeat a little bit just from before you came on to that last slide, because we lost you a little bit, unfortunately. So
okay, no problem.
To interrupt, but we really want to hear what you're saying. Okay.
Yes, thank you. The league, we had a number of reasons to justify our pilot, and as you can see, a European Convention of Human Rights, but it's also in the police law that we have to help and protect people, to serve and protect, like they say in the US. The same counts for the Netherlands. So the legal base, there was a legal base for us to start, and also later on, when it started to switch over from a pilot to policy, we had also the European guidelines, but that was later on. Why? The next slide, please. We thought it was important to connect with everyone in society, and we thought that people were afraid from by the police. They were afraid to deport it if they report a crime. So we had a lot of reasons to connect with those people, with key figures in the communities, like church organizations, NGOs. So we wanted to help them, and by helping them, we also were able to know more about their situations. So we had the opportunity to gather intel against human trafficking, abuse, and all kind of other bad things. But a lot of those people were afraid to have contact with the police because the countries where those people are coming from, for example, West Africa or Brazil or the Philippines, the police has different position in society than the police in Europe or particularly in Amsterdam. So we have to build trust, and we build trust by try to talk with them, and that was very hard in the first place because no one trusts the police, and so we have to find a way to build a trust. And so we connect with those organizations. And if I can go to the next slide, we make cards, special cards for undocumented people, and we gave them to church organizations, NGOs, and other people that are connected with undocumented. And we gave those cards as a kind of a guarantee. If they go to the police, they show this card to the police, and the police knew, okay, this is an undocumented person, and he wants to say something or want to report a crime. So it was a very important card for us, but also for them. So they were pretty secure to go to the police. If I can go to the next slide, you can see that building trust is by having dialogues, and those dialogues were very important for us. And if you look to the right picture, that is in Amsterdam in a church organization, and you can see multiple people from different corners of the world together in a room, and we try to connect with them. We tell them what we are doing and that we also are there to protect them. And it was during a couple of years that we built trust. Building trust is not something that you do in 1 or 2 days. That's what you do in weeks, months, and years. On the left picture, you see a meeting by a labor organization who help undocumented people to protect them against employers who are not paying them well or whatever. So we also try to connect with labor organizations. If I can go to the next picture, the next slide, we saw that more people came forward, not directly maybe to the police, but to the churches and those organizations, and between those migrants and the police, those churches have a very important role in building trust. And so we saw later on that more people also came forward to the police stations, and that they spread the word in their communities. And we discovered that more migrants had trust in police, so it increased the trust. And we also in the Netherlands, we are not hunting for naked illegal aliens or undocumented people, but only those who are criminal and who are stealing or robbing other people, and they know that, and so they are not afraid for us. And we saw more people coming, more cases to the police, and actually we had also a homicide that was solved by an undocumented people who was not afraid to come forward and to help the police and the Justice Department to solve this crime. So we were very happy with the results. And I personally, I think that the best result is for me as a police officer, that people trust you, that you are honest, that you are fair, and that you are police for everyone and not only for people who has papers. If I am able to go to the next slide. Every pilot ends, and also this pilot ends. And you always hope that if you have a good pilot, that it ends in formal policy. And in 2015, I spoke with the national victim project leader for the police, and so together we make it possible that we use the European guideline for victims to implementate the free in and the free out pilot into a formal policy. So today, everyone who comes to the police voluntarily leaves the police voluntarily and arrested only when you are wanted by the police. But that's also that counts for me too. If I am wanted by the police, then I should not go to the police because they will arrest me, and I think that's not the case. So if I can go to the next slide, there are 3 wins. It's for me as a police officer, it's always good to fight against crime. And if you fight against crime, you need people to help you. And if you can help those people by also protecting them for their human rights, right of safety and security, and you also can protect the victims, then I think I'm a happy policeman. And so in this case, after a few years, I can look back to this pilot and see that we did a good job, and we are not finally there yet, because we have a long way to go. Also for police officers who are not familiar with this policy, we have to let them know that we have this policy. So that's my next goal for the next few years, that I'm working on to make more ambassadors for this policy. And you have 2 kinds of people in the police. You have people who want to fight crimes, and you have people who wants to protect people, from a human rights perspective. And I think we can serve both with this way of working. So, and this brings me to the end of the presentation. I'm not sure if I'm within the time zone, but
thank you, Michael.
This was my presentation.
You're just on time. Thank you, Michael. And apologies, I had to interrupt just because we lost your sound for a little bit. But
I'm sorry for that.
Good throughout. So really appreciate you joining us today. It's so insightful and so important for us to learn and hear about the good practice that's happening in Amsterdam. We've talked about it a lot in our meetings, looking at Amsterdam really as the area of good practice, because of that guarantee that you're giving migrant victims, and the trust that you're building with the community, which, as you say, it takes time, it takes years, but you're getting there. So so thank you again for sharing that practice. I know we went a little bit over, but I think it's absolutely vital that we heard from Michael, and I'm sure people will want to ask you questions throughout the morning. So thank you. So I'm coming to our last speaker of the morning, Bob Barrows, who's from New York City Police Department. He's the Director of Legal Operations and Projects at the New York City Police Department. He's worked there for over 8 years. And during his time with NYPD, he has served as the department's expert on immigration law and key contributor to the development of NYPD's immigration policy and around law enforcement certifications to immigrant crime victims. So again, a really important speaker to give us in the UK some real understanding of good practice and how it can work. So Bob, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire. And I really want to thank everybody that has put this event together. It's really great, and I appreciate being a part of it. And it's also always a pleasure to join up with my friend Michael Zwart. It's good to see him too. So This is great. So thank you. So as Claire said, my name is Bob Barrows. I'm the Director of Legal Operations and Projects at the NYPD. And what I'm going to discuss is really the NYPD's immigration policy, which has existed since at least 2010, but has really kind of taken center stage, I would say, since 2016, 2017. And we've kind of consistently been doing a lot of outreach on it. And I think there's kind of two main points I would say before jumping into the PowerPoint. And I think what really guides the NYPD's immigration policy is that we're charged with public safety and we're charged with supporting victims of crime. And one thing as a police agency that would not be acceptable to us is for a crime victim to be continually re-victimized because of the potential of immigration consequences. So that's one point. The second point really for police departments in general, and I talk with a lot of different jurisdictions, is how we measure our success as a police agency is based on crime complaints that we receive. When we talk about the number of crimes that are committed in New York City, we're talking about how many complaints we have received in a given time frame. So how many people have come to a New York City Police Department precinct and filed a crime complaint, or have called 911, or have made their complaint in some way. That's our measuring stick. It's never really arrests, because arrests can be for crimes that happened years ago. But if we really want to take a current look at how we are doing, we're always looking at, the latest crime complaints, and those are our numbers. So why is this important, for this discussion, is that in New York City, we have, studies have suggested we have anywhere near 500,000 undocumented residents in New York City. That's a significant portion, even for a city of 8.5 million people. And if you have a large segment of your population that isn't willing or is hesitant to report crimes to your police department, you may not be getting the most up-to-date or really the best grasp of what is going on in the communities that you police if there is a significant segment that's not reporting crimes to you. So those are really the two guideposts. So I'll go to the next slide. I always kind of talk about New York City and its immensity and just what the responsibility of the NYPD. When you talk about New York City, you're talking about a city of 8.5 million residents. We have almost 6 million people a day are using our public transportation system in New York City. You're talking about an additional 2 million people come into New York City every day to commute and to work. And also anywhere near another million weekly tourists that are coming into New York City. This is obviously pre-COVID. We're obviously in different times at the moment. And anywhere near 25,000 911 calls a day. So you think of the large responsibility that the New York City Police Department has, it's vast. So next slide, please. And then also just some facts and figures about the police department. We also recognize that we're kind of a unique department. We have about 35,000 sworn police officers that work in the department, another 17,500 civilian employees. We also have about 3,000 dedicated traffic agents who do traffic enforcement, directions, enforcing parking and standing regulations. And then another 5,000 school safety agents. We actually have uniform members who police our schools or are assigned to our schools. Next, please. And I always kind of talk about just the evolution of New York City. I mean, New York City has become the safest large city in the world. And you take a look at where we are in New York City now compared to where we were in 1990. The crime picture is vast. We are experiencing some upticks at the moment. It's a difficult year, just like for everybody. We've seen some upticks in terms of shooting incidents and other crimes, but overall, the crime declines have been significant. And always when talking about the NYPD, the question is really what's the secret formula here? crime went down in a lot of major cities, over this period, but they weren't as vast as in New York City. So what's going on in New York City that may be a little bit different? So I'll go to the next slide. And another important part is, even as crime has gone down, we've also been able to cut enforcement, right? We've been able to address conditions without ramping up enforcement. If you take a look at what we've done in the last 6 years, we've actually cut the number of arrests by about 100,000 from where we were 6 years ago. So 100,000 fewer arrests, also 180,000 fewer stops. Those are street encounters in the United States, 180,000 fewer. And then also summonses, which are, it's similar to receiving, a ticket, for a criminal offense or a civil offense. Those are also at historic lows as well. So we kind of had both, where, significant crime declines without it expanding the enforcement footprint. So the next slide, I talk about the formula, and I think there is a formula here, and it is relevant to the discussion. In terms of, there's two things that we do at the NYPD. One is we embrace this precision policing philosophy, which is, we don't want to, invade, let's say, the privacy of the residents in New York City, those who come into New York City, right, in order to keep it safe. What we do is focus on the real drivers of crime. What is driving crime in New York City? So it is a real intense focus on gun prosecutions, gun cases, firearm-related offenses. There is significant focus and attention in ensuring that there is accountabilities and penalties for that in New York City. We focus on recidivism. Like I said, it's actually a small population, a small amount of people in New York City that are actually committing the overall crime that's happening in the city. And then also gang violence. That's in many American cities, and I'm sure a lot of European cities too, gang violence is an issue. It accounts for anywhere nearly to 50 to 60% of the shootings that happen in New York City. So that's where we are focusing our resources, and we think that's why we've been getting a lot of the positive results that we have. But another key component of this, and really relevant to our discussion, is also the embracing of what we call a neighborhood policing philosophy, which is really to have our officers go out there and make contacts with the community. In fact, we have divided up the areas where our officers patrol into smaller segments. And for part of their duties during the day, they're actually spending some time off of their police radios, out of their patrol car, responding to different emergency 911 calls, and actually going out in the community and making contacts, and whether it's local businesses, community leaders, it's significant. And it really is kind of more of a forward, open-minded type of policing philosophy that we've embraced over the last 6 years. So next slide. So then I'll talk about our immigration policy. So it really stems from, I think, 4 principles, and I'll go over those. But overriding is, regardless of immigration status, we want people to feel comfortable reporting crime to the police or seeking services. So the NYPD is tasked with public safety for all. We don't delineate between those who are documented or those who are undocumented. The ultimate goal is to solve crimes, prevent re-victimization, and bring justice to our crime victims. Next slide. So the first is that the NYPD does not inquire about the immigration status of crime victims, witnesses, or those who approach the police seeking assistance. And we think this is important to maintain trust and confidence with those that we serve. And that's actually been incorporated into our department's patrol guide, which makes it, I think some people have brought up in their presentations, that makes it part of the culture at the NYPD. It holds our officers accountable because they can be disciplined if they violate the patrol guide, but it's something that every officer is responsible for knowing. And we try to make this as crystal clear as possible. And like I said, it is something that now becomes part of the culture of the NYPD, and it's known. The second principle, the next slide, is that New York City has a municipal ID program, which can be available to any resident of New York City as long as they can show they can prove their identity and their residency. And there's a whole criteria of how they do that. But what's important for the municipal ID, which can be issued regardless of your immigration status in New York City, is that the NYPD accepts that as a valid form of identification for law enforcement encounters. So for arrests or summonses and others, we accept that as a valid form. So, and that's important because individuals that do not have ID can be subject to prolonged law enforcement encounters. Arrests can take much longer. We actually have to arrest them and bring them back to the precinct, whereas in some cases we can release the person right from the precinct or actually out on the street if they have a valid form of identification. The next principle, next slide, sorry. Unlike a lot of countries, immigration is a province of the federal government in the United States. So it's a responsibility of the national government. It's not a responsibility of local law enforcement. So the NYPD, we do not use any resources to enforce immigration laws. We are a law enforcement agency that enforces criminal laws, conducts criminal investigations in the United States. Violation of immigration laws are generally administrative and civil. So the NYPD does not engage in immigration enforcement. Some local police departments in the United States will enforce immigration laws, but it has to be through an agreement with the federal government. We have never pursued such a agreement. Okay, so I'll move quickly. The next, the last principle is really immigration detainers. And I think a few people brought up in their presentations whether law enforcement has to comply with requests from immigration law enforcement agencies. So in the United States, if somebody is arrested, they are fingerprinted, and that fingerprint is shared with our state government and with our federal government. Sometimes what happens is immigration authorities will send a detainer, which is kind of a written request, and it says to the local police department, can you keep this person in your custody for up to 48 hours so that we can come and pick them up and place them into immigration proceedings? A number of courts in the United States have held that those requests are voluntary, that the police are not required, local police are not required to follow them since it's not a responsibility of local police departments to enforce federal laws. So in New York City, we have criteria for when we will honor one of these detainers for somebody that we've arrested and is in our custody. So the next slide. And that really is, the general rule is if we receive a detainer, we're only going to honor it if we receive a judicial warrant from a court and the person has a conviction history for there's about 175 very serious felony level type crimes. If a person has that kind of history or they're on the National Terror Watch list, we will honor that detainer. That's a very high bar. And actually last year, despite receiving, I think, over 2,000 immigration detainers, we actually honored 0 of them because they don't meet that criteria. So we do not prolong that person's arrest and hold them for immigration proceedings. We simply just process them for the criminal offense that we arrested them for. Next slide. And then just 2 quick points I'll make in the United States. So the idea of supporting victims of crime and particularly immigrant victims of crime is one that's shared across federal, state, and local law enforcement. So there are federal programs for immigrant victims who are of undocumented status. If they are a victim of a crime, they can actually receive a temporary visa to stay in the United States if they cooperate with law enforcement. So if they, respond to law enforcement requests, for more information, they participate in the prosecution of that offense, they can receive what's called the U visa. There's a criteria of qualifying crimes, which I've listed here, like rape, stalking, sex assault, felony assault. To get that visa, the local law enforcement agency has to certify that the person has cooperated. So we actually started in 2013 becoming a certifier of these visas, and we receive quite a bit of them every year. The visa itself is actually issued through the federal government, but like I said, they won't be able to receive the visa unless they get a certification from local law enforcement. And then another program is our T visa, which is on the next slide. The T visa program, which is similar, but it's only focused on victims of human trafficking. So that can include either sex trafficking or labor trafficking. And you know, if they're assisting law enforcement, they can receive a temporary visa as well. In order to get the visa, it's not required that law enforcement certify, but it's usually helpful. So we are also a certifier of T visa applications as well. However, we historically received very few of the T visa requests. We get quite a few U visas, which the next slide will show there. I've posted some recent data. So in actually 2019, we received about 582 U visas. We approved 460 of them. That's about 80%, I believe. Why some get denied? It's usually because either the crime isn't a qualifying one, the person has a significant criminal history, or they just don't have enough documentation, and we've made repeated requests and they haven't presented it to us. T visas, like I said, we historically get very few, maybe a handful, and actually in last year we received 0. Like I said, historically we get anywhere, you know, between 1 to 3 a year. So it's not as deployed as often as the U visa. But oh, okay. So I went a little faster than I thought. So at the end of the day, you know, it's like I said. I think all of this really for the NYPD stems from the idea that, you know, public support and public trust is really something that local law enforcement needs. It's something that needs to be preserved. So a really important piece of this is, like I said, since 2017, immigration has really taken the forefront. So our department has really engaged in quite a bit of outreach to really get the word out, so that our undocumented residents know that, look, if you seek NYPD services, if you're going to report a crime to NYPD, it's not going to incur additional, you know, collateral immigration consequences. It's like I said, it wouldn't be acceptable for us that someone refuses to report a crime because of immigration concerns. We want people to feel comfortable to come forward to us. So really from the police commissioner on down, we've really been engaged in an outreach effort with a number of community groups, advocacy organizations, you know, our mayor's office as well, to really get the word out, because we do have federal law enforcement agencies that operate in New York City independent of the NYPD, and sometimes that can be really disruptive to the community. They see a deportation raid take place, or they see immigration enforcement taking place. And what we want people to know is, you know, they can operate independently, but they're not doing this in conjunction with the NYPD. And it's a really important aspect. And it's something that we've continued to really push out over the last couple of years. So that's the end of the slide. And you know, thank you for the time. And I'm looking forward to you know, discussion and questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you so much. I'll let you go over more at the time, because no. I think it was so important that we hear how it works over there. I know that from the mayor's perspective in London, I know that they've been over to New York to actually look a lot at how policing is working over there. We've taken a lot of lessons already, but there's definitely a huge amount for us to learn regarding the way in which you're structured, you know, very much focused on that public safety and supporting victims of crime in order to build that trust. So yeah, hugely informative. Thank you so much. I know we will kind of come straight over to questions. So I'm pleased to see we've got a number of questions from attendees. So the first one's actually directed to Michael and Bob. So I might ask Michael to answer this one first. It's an anonymous question. It's have you found resistance in adopting these practices? And if so, how did you address those resistances? So Michael, if you could kindly answer that first, and then Bob, if you wouldn't mind answering afterwards.
Oops. Yeah, we discovered some resistance inside the police, but also from outside of the police, from some politic parties. who are against the fact that we helped undocumented people. So yeah, we have we had some work, particularly within the police. People said, well, if you are undocumented, you are illegal and you should be leaving the country. That's right. If you are illegal, you should not stay in the Netherlands. But if you are in the Netherlands and you are a victim of crime, you also deserve help from the government. So first, I always try to approach it by the human rights aspect of it. And if that do not work, then I will approach it from the intel position. And then I always say to my colleagues who are a little bit against this project, I tell them, do you think that we need the help from citizens if we want to tackle crime? If we want to find a perpetrator for murder or human trafficking? Do you think that we need help from people who are victims? And victims are also people who are undocumented. And then you see a little shifting, and it was also with our state secretary, Mr. Teven, who is known as a crime fighter. But when I talked with him about victims, that was the moment that he thought, well, yeah, that's a point. From the point of the victims and the point of the incel position as a police, it's important that we cooperate with pilots or formal policy as it is now for the whole national Dutch National Police. Is that enough answer?
Thank you, Michael. Bob, the same question to you. Thank you.
I think there's two parts to it. I think the first part, and Michael really touched on it, is the victimization side of it. And I'm doing this from the perspective of just the law enforcement community. I think I don't really think there's resistance to the idea that victims of crimes or those that are seeking service from the police, that we're not inquiring about immigration status. I think that is, I think, generally accepted in the law enforcement community. Is, that's an important point. That's part of the mission of police departments, so it makes sense. I think where we receive some criticism or resistance is really in cases where we do arrest someone. And I talked about that detainer procedure where we arrest someone and we receive notification from federal immigration enforcement that they want us to hold somebody, and we elect not to. I say elect, it's really not elect, because the city, New York City, has passed a local law that basically dictates when we honor those detainers. So we do follow the law, but there are some that will criticize, well, why did you let this person walk out of the precinct, or why didn't you give this person to immigration enforcement? But we comply with the laws that we are given, right? It's not it's not optional. There are circumstances where we'll comply with an immigration detainer, but overwhelmingly we don't, because they don't meet the criteria for it. And then another part of it is just information sharing with other agencies, right? I talked about how there's a hodgepodge of local, state, federal law enforcement. But I think, at least in the American system, I think it's pretty clear that local law enforcement, for the most part, is kind of walled off, or there's a wall between what they will do when it comes to immigration. And that is, it's not really their responsibility. They enforce, crimes that occur. They're criminal law enforcement agencies. So, it's very clear, I think, to our federal partners what we will collaborate on and what we will work with, and that's all in the criminal sphere and not in the immigration or civil enforcement type area. That's not where we're going to be. We haven't so much seen resistance from our federal partners on a transactional level. but certainly some politics comes into play too. Like, some may know that the federal government has, instituted lawsuits against cities that don't comply with these immigration detainers or immigration orders. Most of these cases, the courts have rejected those lawsuits. Generally, the ability and the penalty is that the federal government will not give funding to those cities, federal funding. But federal funding is really dictated not so much by the president or the executive branch of the government, but actually by Congress. Congress is generally the body that sets conditions. So for the executive branch or the president to put new conditions on funding, that has to be congressionally approved. And that's why a lot of these lawsuits have failed. So we haven't seen really, cuts to funding haven't really materialized, at least in this regard. And, we're still able to maintain strong relationships with our federal partners.
Great, thank you, Bob. Yeah, I find that interesting. Obviously, it's a very different setup over there, that it hasn't impacted the funding. So, yeah, but yeah, very interesting to hear exactly how it's working over there, and that you haven't had as much resistance, which is great. Just the next question, because we've got quite a lot of questions, so I'm going to move on. Is actually to Letícia. Saying, just to clarify, there's nothing to state that it's mandatory for the police to be accompanied by a Home Office representative when they're called to a suspected incident of modern slavery or human trafficking.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, so when we have spoken to different police officers about how they decide who to bring along when they do operations, they did tell us they don't have to. But that they will if they consider that that's something useful to what they're doing, and that it's not just about the Home Office and immigration enforcement, that's in general. So if, for example, they consider that bringing a specific labor enforcement will be useful for them, that they will bring. So it seems that there is discretion around who they choose to bring or choose not to bring to each operation, as well as whether or not they want to join a Home Office-led operation, for example, whether they would want to do that or not. So yeah, it doesn't seem to be mandatory. So there seems to be scope for challenging that and for making sure that victims are able to perceive the police and immigration enforcement as two separate things, and that won't work to the detriment of the police being able to do their job.
Great, thank you, Letícia, for that. The next question is around language barriers and how that impacts reporting. And this is directed at Bob, and I'm also going to bring Dolores in on this as well, but I'll come to Bob first. So it's really around those barriers and translators that they're not available, they're not trusted, and how can we make this better? So we have phone lines like Big Word and Language Line, but they're not very good. They know they're used across the board in the UK. Is there anything more being looked at to help with the language barriers? So I think Dolores will answer, but Bob, is there anything specifically where you are that addresses that, the effects of a language barrier and how that impacts reporting?
So, I mean, we also do utilize Language Line here in our police facilities, but I think one of the benefits of working for the NYPD, and really, if you take both our uniform numbers and our civilian numbers, you're talking of a law enforcement agency of about 50,000. And, in that it's a diverse police department. We have people that are from, were born in different countries, hundreds of different countries. And that means that we have a number of officers, a number of personnel that are fluent in a lot of the languages that are spoken in New York City. So one thing that we do have is we do have not just Language Line, but we do have in-person translation, where we have personnel that can be on call in case there's a language barrier issue and they can be reached. And that's sometimes, like I said, the benefit of being a large police department, a diverse police department. And those are always really important. We feel that victims and those that come forward certainly open up when we have a person who can come into the precinct or get on the phone and is speaking to them in person in their language. The other part of this is New York City has a local law that essentially requires that all kind of essential documents that are distributed to the public are to be available in, I think, the 10 most commonly spoken languages in New York City. So it's not every document that you know the NYPD issues, because we issue a lot of paperwork, but the most common ones that talk about services that are available, they are to be translated. So we have them in a variety of different languages, both in our facilities, on our website, and you know, that's also an important piece to this too.
Thank you, Bob. And I think, Dolores, you wanted to come in and comment on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. This is obviously a really complex issue, and I just wanted to bring in a couple more things that we should keep in mind, really, when we discuss interpretations from a perspective of an NGO, which is that two things, really. We hear from many service users who go to the police or a local authority or even the NHS, and their children are made to act as interpreters. And when you're reporting exploitation, when you're reporting domestic abuse, this can be highly, highly damaging and traumatizing for the child who has to do it, and for the mother as well, who puts their child in that position. And other times, NGOs get asked to fulfill this role, and it takes up a lot of valuable time that can't go to other service users. So we do have systems in place, however imperfect, which aren't really working. So we have to make sure first that everyone knows what their responsibilities are, what their obligations are in this sense. And the other thing that I think we should take into account is the issue of gender sensitivity and cultural sensitivity as well. So it might not always be appropriate to have, for example, a man translating or interpreting for someone who is a woman or a trans person. It might not always be a good idea to have someone who doesn't understand the culture either, as things might get misinterpreted as well. Just wanted to bring those two issues to the table as well.
Thank you, Dolores. Thank you. We've got a lot of questions to go through, so I want to try and to move on as quickly as possible, because there's some great questions here. This one's directed to Bob and Michael. So Bob, if you can answer first, then Michael. It's what support and safe houses are available for a migrant who reports a crime and doesn't claim asylum? So Bob, if you can answer that first, please.
In terms of the services it's a really great question. Thank you. One thing that we've done in the last, I want to say 5 years, and I think it's been an important program that we've had, is that we now have in every one of our police precincts, and there's 77 of them in New York, we have 2 what are called victim advocates that are in the precinct. They're not NYPD employees. They're actually they're from a local service provider. One deals with just domestic violence crimes for people who are victims of domestic violence. The other is just for all other crimes. And what they do is they try to they make the victims aware of services. There are victim compensation funds that are available in the United States. If their housing status is in jeopardy, they can help alleviate some of those. They can work with, if they live in public housing, they can work with our public housing agencies. They can deal with, child care matters, and it's an important program. And I think it's something that's been helpful in terms of building that community trust, supporting our victims.
Thanks, Bob. Really interesting. So you say it's just 2 victim advocates?
Right, in every one of our precincts, yeah. So they have dedicated space in the precincts, and after the victims report the crime and speak with us, we always refer them to the advocates who can help them with any services that.
And may I ask, can the victims stay in touch with those advocates, or is it touch point for the beginning bit? Or?
Yeah, no, it's not a one and done. Yeah, they can stay in touch with them for sure.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Bob. Michael, the same question to you.
Maybe you can give the question again in a nutshell for me.
Yes, of course. So it was just asked what support and safe house is available for a migrant who reports a crime and doesn't claim asylum. So what do you offer there?
Yeah. We have a special department for victims, which is actually somewhere between the DA and the police. And we are in contact with them. We give them also information, and they take over the role, and they have also the contact with the victims, and they support them as well in terms of compensation, victim compensations. And so they do the support of the victims, and every police officer has a basic knowledge about helping victims, and also know their European rights. So that's what we offer our victims.
Michael, when you say a special department for victims, is it similar to what Bob said? Is it independent from the police? Are they NGOs,
yeah.
or is it part of the police?
Yes, no, it's not part of the police. It's an own body, and they support the victims, but they also are formally in touch with the district attorney and the police organization. So they are a formal partner in the cooperation between police, DA, and also if case go to the judge, they also support victims.
Okay, great, thank you for your answer. Sarah, if I can come to you now for this question specifically to you. It's asked, do you think the line between trafficking and smuggling isn't always clear, especially given the modern slavery police transformation unit changing their remit to cover MSHT and organised immigration crime, and the portrayal of both in the media?
So I've been asked this question before on a chat not that long ago, but my view is that although the law is different, in terms of one is an offence which has victims, modern slavery, and smuggling is an offence against the state. In fact, in terms of victims, you often find people on their perilous journeys might start off being smuggled, but might end up being trafficked. That is definitely the kind of business model with Vietnamese patterns, that often there's smuggling to begin with, and then people are trafficked in the last leg and then in debt bondage and have to pay the money back. But also in terms of the offenders, the organised crime groups that are involved in this move from smuggling to trafficking with great ease. So my view would be the law is different, but in fact there is massive overlap in terms of victims' perspective, but also in terms of the offenders. Can I just say something on the issue of U visas? It was really interesting to hear Bob describe U visas, because I'm very familiar with T visas. And while on paper they always look good, but the numbers, as Bob was showing, are really quite low right across the US. Right. But the U visa begins to answer the question that I posed, that if you were to have firewalls, what happens when a case goes to prosecution with an undocumented migrant? And maybe if we had something like a U visa that begins to regularize people's status while they're going through the criminal justice system. So I think that's really an idea worth exploring, because I don't think you can just deal with the police and law enforcement part of this. You need to think about the whole of the process. And that's why probably I would argue it's an issue for Parliament. But really interesting idea.
Thanks, Sarah. And I think, Letícia, you also wanted to comment on that question.
Yeah, so agree with Dame Sarah. And I think if we're talking about secure reporting and we're talking about what the police can do, I think it's less so for the police to decide whether it's a case of smuggling or if it's a case of trafficking, or if someone is the reason why someone is undocumented, and more for the police to ensure that the trust is there, so that if that person has experienced exploitation or has experienced domestic abuse and other crimes, that they are actually willing to come forward and to report what's happened to them and to seek help. So as Bob was describing in relation to the US, it's not so much for him to make the decision around immigration. That's immigration's job. So the police's job is to make sure that people feel safe coming forward and feel like they can trust the institution that was created to provide them with that assistance when they need it. Thank you.
Thanks, Letícia. The next question, again, it's back to Bob, and also I wanted to get Michael's views on it. You talked about how you built trust and confidence with the community, but also about whether you worked a lot with the charities and the NGOs in establishing and delivering this process, and what role did they play in this work? So Bob, if I could come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this, so like I said, the policies, it has really been, on the books with the NYPD for at least 10 years, but probably longer. New York City just has a large history of supporting, supporting our residents, and that includes undocumented residents, and that really spans political ideologies as well, stemming from some of our more conservative mayors to our current mayor who is a progressive. We were permitting undocumented children to be educated in New York City schools. I think in the early 90s, we were extending city services across the board in the late 90s to undocumented residents. And I think the NYPD's policy is just kind of a continued evolution. In terms of working with NGOs and community partners, we've done a lot. We've done a lot with those organizations. Like I said, we've really been in a concerted effort when it comes to outreach. Immigration is a really hot button issue in the United States over the last 3.5 years, and some of the unfortunate collateral consequences are what happens is what we're trying to prevent with these policies, which are segments of the population are reticent to report crimes or seek help from the NYPD. So we have worked with, our mayor's office has a separate office called the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, which really is a liaison for a lot of these different immigrant support service groups, for advocacy organizations, and they have really been a liaison which has kind of given them a voice in bringing issues to the attention in the NYPD and other city agencies regarding immigration. So, I myself have done a number of outreach events. I've been on panels such as these, in New York City and others, usually in conjunction with a lot of these different organizations to really get the word out and make clear what the NYPD's policy is, so that we kind of avoid some of the misunderstanding that accompanies a really hot button issue like immigration has the last couple of years.
Great, thank you, Bob, for that. And Michael, I'll just remind you as well of the question, just what work you've done with charities and NGOs in establishing and delivering this process, and what role have they played to really help you move this forward?
Well, as Bob already also mentioned in New York, the same goes for Amsterdam. And as you know, New York, the name of New York used to be New Amsterdam, so we have a lot in common. The engagement with NGOs, church and charity organizations is really key for us, because they already have the trust of the migrants. So if we cooperate with those organizations, we can build trust. We first build the trust with them, with those organizations, and they can also translate our means to them, and also the other way around. So for us, it's very important. It still is very important. But one thing is also very important to know: are you talking to the right organizations? Because some people, they call themselves important and the spokesman or the spokeswomen of an organization, but sometimes it's not true. So it also, you need to investigate a little bit more about the particular organization. Are they representative? So not everyone, if someone say I represent a group, it doesn't mean that it is always true. Sometimes they represent their own interest, but basically most NGOs or most church organizations, they have good reasons to cooperate with. So yes, they are very important for us.
Thank you, Michael. Just, I know we have lots of questions, but a quick one just on that from me. That we've talked about it here a lot with the sector that we've worked with to try and understand how we build that trusted community, and as you have both done in your countries. But the issue that we kept coming back to was that we couldn't even get over the first hurdle, which was how do we actually get them migrant community to come forward to begin with, to build that trust. So it's all very well getting them there, and then it takes a few years to build the trust. But we were talking about setting up specific places in halls and through churches and places of worship, but we were worried we wouldn't even be able to get them there. So how did you tackle that bit?
Well, first thing you have to do is to search for common ground. If you have common ground, then the rest is easy, and you have to put light on the common crowd. And most of the time, those organizations came forward to us. And that's a good start, because they need us and we need them. But again, back to your question, how and what is the main tool is common ground.
Thank you, Michael. I know that we're going to have to wrap up soon, so and we do have a lot of questions, which I hope, and I'm just looking to the organisers, we will still be able to direct to those panelists today and go back to those that have asked the question. I hope we'll be able to do that. I'm just going to come to one final question, just looking through, and again, it's to Bob and Michael. So if I ask Michael first, what would you say has been the main benefit to your work from adopting this approach?
The main benefit is engagement with the community. And I think that any police service or police force who has connection and engagement with community is a good start. So it's very important to know what happens in your society, and it would be very bad if you have a black spot in your communities. So the benefit is that we learn to know them. We can tackle crime, and we can tackle crime together. So that's the main benefit.
Thank you. And Bob, just very quickly from you on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Michael. I think public safety is really a shared responsibility, and building bridges with the communities we're serving is always positive. I often use, I think we've done a very good job in terms of outreach and communicating our message. And I think that's a big part of it, is to have a consistent message and leveraging the different outlets, whether that's social media, whether that's live events that were press conferences, and just reiterating the message over and over again. I think it's important. I think some have acknowledged in the questions, it's a really challenging time right now in the United States with policing. And this is my personal opinion, maybe not with the NYPD's opinion, but I think when it comes to policing, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that I think police departments deliver services very well, but I think in a lot of cases there's a customer service issue that I don't think police departments always do a great job of explaining why they do the things that they do. They talk, and that's always, and I think that's something that really is going to move us forward from some of the issues we're having. But I always use, this has always been like a great example of how we've done that and moved forward as a department, and that is we've had this consistent message. It's a policy that we've worked together with a number of advocacy groups and organizations who, in other circumstances, maybe we're not always in the same boat when it comes to what we agree on. But this is something where, look, we have a policy that makes sense, that supports the key the key missions of these of the department in supporting victims and having public safety as well. So, you know, in terms of looking at the issues that policing are facing and this, like I said, customer service issue, I always have been able to really point to this and say, like, look, this was a really challenging topic, but we've been able to really spread the message, and I think really have a high level of engagement with the communities that we serve. And I think it's been positive overall.
Thank you, Bob. Unfortunately, we're going to have to close the event. I just want to say a huge thank you to all our speakers, our panelists today, to really, for us on the UK side, for really setting the scene and identifying where the issues are. We do have a lot of work still to do in this country. And so it was really beneficial for us to hear from both Michael and Bob, who shared such good examples of great practice. You know, one of the first things I was asked to do when I became Victims Commissioner for London, when I was appointed by the Mayor, was to work on the refresh of his VAWG strategy, Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. And it was through that I led survivor consultations that I really came across these terrible, terrible cases where victims of very serious crime, migrant victims of trafficking, abuse, domestic violence, rape, sexual assault, were having to make the most terrible choices and being sort of either deciding between staying in that awful cycle of abuse or facing the fear of being arrested and deported, where they would therefore face further harm when they were returned to their countries of origin. So it was really, really shocking. And I've worked very closely with the organizations in the sector over the last 3 years. We've really tried to identify a lot of the issues that we've talked about today, and the campaigns that we've all done to try and progress it and change it. So we really know what needs to happen. The frustration is it hasn't happened here yet for us. And we have an opportunity, as we said, through the domestic abuse bill, but that's only for the sort of domestic abuse victims, to really try and create that firewall and protect migrant victims so they can report securely and safely. But we know that we still have some way to go on trying to achieve that. And there's a lot of strengthening, I think, as Sara had talked about earlier. You know, we need to look at, you know, the rights and protections are there, but we need to look at strengthening legislations to really ensure that that happens in practice. We have guidance, but there's sort of a, I think, misunderstanding with guidance, and this misunderstanding around this duty on police that they have to share. I work really closely with the Met Police, and they still say to me, but we have this duty to share. And what I've really taken from today, from Bob and Michael, especially from Bob, is around that real victim focus. It's very victim centric and very much focused on law enforcement and ensuring that you are tackling serious crime and prioritizing that over immigration enforcement, and seeing, you know, how beneficial that is. And the outreach work that's happening for both Bob and Michael in their areas, so important, working with the communities, building that trust and confidence. I know I've talked about it again with Flex and with LAWRS. We've had this discussion. How do we get police to build confidence and trust with communities? And that's some work that, for you who are attending today, if you're working in different police forces, that's something you can start on now. You know, that's a really, you know, you can go away and identify your own practices, as Letícia said, and work more closely with migrant communities and the organizations that support them, and really try and tackle that lack of trust and confidence now, and ensure there are ways that they can safely and securely report and access the support that they do have a right to. You know, we are talking about breaches of human rights that are happening in our country, and that these victims, of serious crime, migrant victims, are not getting the support that they need. But as Sara rightly says, a big part of the solution lies with national government. And so, as I said, we need a lot of work there. So if there are parliamentarians or those who work with MPs on this event today, that's something that we really need to look at pushing forward. And ensuring that the protections are there. So it's undoubtedly a very challenging political context in which we talk to those issues affecting migrant communities. But I just want to finish off just again praising the work of everyone who's spoken today, because there's some fantastic work happening here in this country, but a lot of great practice and work happening in other countries that I hope we can bring here and really start moving forward on. And for having, thank you to LAWRS and to FLEX as well and Pecan for really initiating such an important event and for these important discussions to happen. And I hope there's a lot of sharing on the chat of the great reports and research and networks as well, that we can continue communicating with Bob's offices and Michael as well, so we can continue that learning and to really, you know, discuss and continue pushing forward the important changes that we've highlighted today. So a huge thank you. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you for everyone attending and listening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Dolores.
you so much.
Thank you. Well done. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Sarah,
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Bob and Michael. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Best.